Hello, everyone. We're back. I know we took a break last week, so thank you again for being here with us. But again, my name is Nuno, and this is the Reform Review. So we have quite a bit to cover. As you can imagine, a lot has happened these past 2 weeks. Although I will say that it is surprising at how little progress has been made in terms of the situation at the U.S. Mexico border, as well as any kind of motion for immigration reform. So today's going to be a little bit different than we usually do it, just because we're coming back right now. It will be more of a focus on what kind of immigration news has occurred this past 2 weeks, as well as a quick summary of where we currently stand with the different immigration bills that are in consideration in the House and also the ones that have been moving towards the Senate. A little bit less on what we can do right now. We'll really go into those details in the next program in 1 week. But for now, we will really get into the news of the past 2 weeks with a focus more on what has recently happened, since it kind of is related to the past 2 weeks. So to really start, we want to talk about the U.S. Mexico border. If you remember from 2 weeks ago, our last show before we took our break, we did focus primarily on that to explain why it's so important for immigration reform currently under consideration. And it really does continue to hold that place in the U.S. Congress. So to really start, we want to talk about what has happened recently with President Biden. He did not have a press conference until March 25th, which is a little bit strange for U.S. presidents. They usually are a little bit more vocal with the media. So this was President Biden's first press conference of his presidency. And what we understood is that while he continues to defend his immigration policy despite great pushback from Republican representatives, no surprise, as usual. I'm going to share, again, as always, a couple of articles that we can kind of look at and get that full grasp of the situation. So in this case, Biden has really tried to defend his policy by saying that not much has changed from the time under President Trump, and this is relatively true. He is continuing to use the same policy to expel a majority of adults and families under the pretense of COVID-19 outbreaks. So the main difference, as it explains here, is that they're allowing teens and children, at least temporarily, to stay in the country. And this is why we're seeing such a crisis at the U.S. border of facilities being overwhelmed and the resources that are already limited being overwhelmed. This is a direct statement from the president. He said that the only people we're not going to let be left sitting there on the other side of the Rio Grande by themselves with no help are children. And so this is very much the highlight of his current policies, as you're hopefully well aware at this point, is that these are the exact same U.S. policies that were implemented under the Trump administration. However, with the big difference that he is making a clear exception for especially unaccompanied minors at the U.S. border. And this includes family units that have children with them. So again, this is a very big piece of why we're seeing the crisis at the southern border. And it's pretty meaningful that President Biden has been defending his policies at his first press conference. And I imagine going forward, it'll be the same kind of defense by the president's administration. We'll see how that really plays out. But other big news that was released, I believe, a little bit over a week ago, was that the vice president, Kamala Harris, will be in charge of addressing the crisis at the border. Now, some people took that to mean that she will be visiting the U.S. border frequently or helping to craft the asylum policies or the preferences and priorities at the U.S. border. Now, that's not true, as was really clarified by the White House, is that one, Vice President Harris has no intention for the time being in the near future to visit the U.S. Mexico border. Instead, what the president has asked her to do is to lead, as it says here, lead diplomatic efforts aimed at addressing a rise in the number of migrants coming from the Northern Triangle countries of Central America. So this is more of a diplomatic role. It means that Vice President Harris is really just going to be focused, as it says here, with working with Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras to try and get those countries as well involved in the process of stemming the flow of migrants to the border. So it does seem that the president and vice president are taking dual roles, right? So the president himself is being involved in the process of creating the policies that we're seeing implemented at the border, the priorities, opening up new migrant centers, emergency shelters, and really trying to make changes to the asylum process to alleviate the stress that's building up at the U.S. border. Meanwhile, the vice president will be helping to have, again, those diplomatic talks with the countries where a majority of these migrants are coming from to see if those countries themselves can help reduce the number of migrants who are fleeing from their countries. How this is going to work out, I'm not 100% sure. Those kind of details have not been fleshed out or really shared widely for us to know what the vice president will be doing in these conversations, what kind of promises will have to be met, and how these countries in these discussions will actually enforce these kind of policies. Again, they can try the best they can. They can maybe slow the amount of lower the number of people who are leaving their country, but it's not going to be a full pause. It's not going to stop this flow of migration. So this still leaves a lot in question, and especially with the side of now President Biden. What is he actually doing recently? And very recently, so this is still at the end of March, so only some days ago, between the days of March 27th and April 1st, we start to really understand just how many corners are being cut at the U.S. border to make up for the lack of resources and care being provided, especially to unaccompanied minors. We're going to see a couple of reports from the Associated Press about this. This first one, again, comes in March 27th, whereas the headline really explains is that the U.S. has begun to waive FBI checks on caregivers at these new emergency migrant facilities. So what this means is that typically caregivers who are going to directly care for these migrant children would need an FBI background check to make sure that everything's fine and it's safe. So this background check is being waived now to try and speed up the process of getting more caregivers to provide their services at these facilities. So this has gotten quite a bit of pushback, especially from different rights groups trying to seek the best for these children out of fear that some of these people may be posing a threat to the safety of these children. So as it says here, right, just to really highlight the point that I'm getting across, is that in the rush to get children out of overcrowded and often unsuitable border patrol sites, President Joe Biden's team is turning to a measure used by previous administrations: tent camps, convention centers, and other huge facilities operated by private contractors and funded by the U.S. Health and Human Services. In March alone, the Biden administration announced it will open 8 new emergency sites across the Southwest, adding 15,000 new beds, more than doubling the size of its existing systems. And just again, we covered this slightly before, but these centers are not very effective in their cost. They, as it says here, they cost an estimated $775 per child per day. And so not only are these overcrowded, as they will be, not only are they not safe and they do not provide the adequate resources at times, since they're so rushed to be created, they are also not effective when it comes to the expense of U.S. tax dollars. So that's just something else to consider. And to the point of this article, and to staff the sites quickly, the Biden administration has waived vetting procedures intended to protect minors from potential harm. Staff and volunteers directly caring for children at new emergency sites don't have to undergo FBI fingerprint checks, which use criminal databases not accessible to the public and can overcome some changing their name and using a false identity. So again, this really does highlight the extent that the Biden administration is willing to go now in order to address this border crisis. Is really the pressure is mounting, partly from the media, but also from Republican representatives who are looking to take this opportunity and use it to their advantage. So this is within the migrant facilities what's happening, but we're also seeing what's happening at the border for those who are being processed for potential asylum. And that is that I believe, let's see, it is the, one of these departments actually. Essentially at the border, what is happening now is a change in policy, is that rather than provide court notices, so a court notice is for a migrant who is going through the process of asylum to be called back to court for their date to then go through the court procedure of hopefully being able to remain in the U.S. So what is happening now is quite concerning, is that because of the overwhelming number of cases that need to be filed, and we'll kind of show you the number just to put it into perspective, they have now begun to release migrants without court notices, so they will not know immediately what date their court, when they had to appear in court, as well as with other documents that are important to know the current step of their procedure. And this is by the Customs and Border Protection Agency, which also oversees Border Patrol. So just to put that out there and be very clear who is putting this policy forward. So as it says here, they'll eventually get their court notice, but it's only at their 60-day check-in with ICE agents. So if we're no strangers, if you happen to be an ally of the immigrant community or an immigrant yourself, ICE is not the most kind towards immigrants, and it's typically a very hostile relationship with them. So it's very, very concerning that the people who are responsible for providing them their information and their legal documents for their court notice will be the same people who are actively working to try and remove them from the country. It says elsewhere in this article that really they do have a few options available to them. They can potentially issue a notice to appear in court, so that's their notice to go, or expel them from the country, or just do nothing and let them just aimlessly sort of be in limbo rather than progressing their legal case. So this is definitely a abuse of due process in the U.S. It's not common, and it should not be common practice. But what we can say is that, well, the main reason they're doing this is because they say it's too much work and it takes too long to file these court notices for these migrants. So again, it's because there's so many cases being piled up, they're using this as an excuse to just not essentially do their job. Now, it says here, to better understand really why this is such an issue, is that the immigration courts have a backlog of 1.3 million cases. That's just how many cases have not been able to be processed to this point. This does not include the people who are coming as well to hopefully have their case reviewed. So some people could be waiting months to years before they're able to get their court hearing. So really it is a legal limbo of what can they do while they wait in this country? Where can they go? Where can they stay? We are not sure what will happen with a lot of these migrants who now are being told to just wait around for this kind of a court notice to hopefully have a chance to fight their case and stay in this country where they are more safe than going back to their country of origin. So we do need to really keep an eye on this. It is very, very concerning, this kind of a practice. We're not sure how long it'll last. Again, it's not so much through the Biden administration, although they should act quickly and try to stem this, either by providing more resources to the department as they have to file all these court notices, or, of course, helping to address the really broken immigration court system in this country so that they can make more progress on this backlog, because 1.3 million is obviously way too many cases on hold, waiting and to be processed. So we are going to have to wait and see what happens from this. Of course, every week we're going to provide an update. So if we hear any changes to this policy, we'll definitely update that. Next is a little follow-up to a story we kind of covered 2 weeks ago, which is about how the Biden administration was limiting the information that could come out from officers and officials at the U.S. border about the current state of migrant care and the overall crisis at the border. If you remember, it was an unofficial gag order, which means that no one was allowed to talk without permission from the White House, essentially. So what we've seen now is that there was quite a lot of pressure from different media organizations fighting to get access not only to the Health and Human Services facilities after these migrant children are processed and then assigned to these facilities, but rather to see the current state of border facilities where really the overwhelming crisis is occurring. So we're going to look at two articles to really capture what occurred these past 2 weeks. Is that this article is from, let me just get that quickly, the 26th of March. And then we have more recent news of what occurred. Well, different news organizations continuously tried to access these facilities but were blocked. So again, continuing the same process that we covered last time from the Biden administration, blocking really any eyes going into these facilities. The reasoning given by the Biden administration was that they needed to establish safeguards for COVID transmission and to protect the privacy of children as they work to set up their system for processing migrants. President Biden at that time, I believe this comes from his press conference. He said that he commits to transparency, and as soon as I am in the position to implement what we are doing, that is really what he said, that they were still waiting at that time to get everything set up to then allow media organizations and press to go and really have a look at these border facilities. Now, after all this pressure, the Biden administration finally did allow certain organizations to go and see the state of the border facilities. I believe it was the Associated Press, which is why we're really focused on their articles, and CBS. These two organizations went to a facility in Dona, Texas, and they did report pretty accurately on the current state of these facilities. So just to really explain the current scope of these issues, is that in the Dona facility, and remember, this is only one example of the facilities that are being overrun. It was opened in February 9th, so very recently, only a little over a month, or rather 2 months by this point. It's tremendously overcrowded. It was holding more than 4,100 migrants on Tuesday in space designed for only 250 under federal guidelines to contain the spread of COVID-19. More than 3,400 were unaccompanied children, and the rest were parents and their children. So this does show us the current extent of this really overwhelming presence of migrants coming to the U.S., is that these facilities, although they're being rapidly built to try and house a lot of these migrants who are waiting to be processed for potential asylum, it's not sufficient. And really, these numbers are very, very concerning. Having over 4,000 migrants in a facility designed for 250 people during COVID is not ideal by any means, and it's very, very concerning in terms of a human rights perspective. And we see these kind of trends in many other facilities, border facilities, according to sort of like underground reporting when different representatives, U.S. representatives, will go in person and take some subtle pictures without being noticed. So it's not too far off to assume then that the condition of essentially all border facilities along the U.S. Mexico border are under similar conditions of overcrowding and potential risk of infection of COVID-19. Now, this is not to say that the migrant population that are coming in are inherently a COVID risk, but rather that while they're waiting for a due process to be potentially allowed for asylum, they are put at high risk of transmission due to really the overwhelming of these facilities. So that is really what's happened at the U.S. border. But as we mentioned, it's really a volatile topic which is affecting us overall, which is very unfortunate. It's really being used by a lot of opportunistic representatives and people out there trying to make the most of this situation for themselves. So to start, I do want to talk about really the extent that this border crisis has affected the Biden administration and the potential for immigration reform. Again, a very usual topic to talk about on this show. Is that if you look here, just so you have a very clear idea, the extent of this. This was a poll conducted by the Associated Press. Over 1,000 interviews. I'll zoom in a little bit more so you can really see these numbers. But when it comes to approval and disapproval of the president's handling of different crises, when it comes to COVID-19, you can see he has a very high approval rating. 73% of those interviewed said that he's doing a good job. You see similar things when it comes to healthcare, although I have my own critiques of the U.S. healthcare. He seems to have a general approval. The economy is also decently approved. Foreign policy is starting to get a little bit weak. And once you see these bottom four, that's where you start to go under the majority of people in support of his policies. But more concerning is that the two weakest links happen to be border security and immigration. And so this is the extent of this campaign by conservative members of Congress to really hammer down that the border is in a crisis and is the fault of the president and Democrats who are currently in office. And so, as you can see, it's been pretty successful. Only 42%, so less than the majority of Americans who are interviewed for this, in particular, support or approve of the president's handling of immigration policy and border security. So we do have to be very careful when it comes to allowing this kind of a crisis to continue for an extended period of time, because it does reduce the possibility of us fighting for immigration reform in a comprehensive manner. And even for more safer populations such as the Dreamers, DACA recipients, even TPS holders, that's also put at risk if we do not address this kind of a crisis. That's really the crutch of an argument against immigration reform right now. To follow up on this, we can really see the extent that Republican representatives are going to take advantage of this current crisis. This article, again, by the Associated Press, talks about, or mentions rather, it doesn't really focus on this topic, but I do find it to be the more interesting piece, is that it reminds us of the 100-day deportation moratorium, right? So that it was going to be a 100-day pause on any deportations from the federal government. Now, what we're seeing here is the mention of this man in particular, and I do want to highlight him, is Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. He happened to be the one who put in the injunction and sued the government to stop this moratorium, which, again, if you remember from one of our past coverages, was killed eventually and could no longer exist. So this was really started by, again, Texas Attorney General, and sorry for that mistake there. We're going to go back here. Now, what this is telling us is that there is a push by Republican representatives and Republican officials, conservative officials, for a return to Trump-era politics. Not only did Attorney General Paxton lead the push against the 100-day deportation moratorium, he's also leading a push to get the justices to reimpose the Trump-era immigration rule denying green cards to immigrants who use public benefits like food stamps. So what this is alluding to is the public charge rule. If you remember, we covered the public charge rule, I believe 3 or 4 weeks ago in one of our shows, to say that the courts finally decided not to pursue it. It was dropped. And so it seemed as if the Biden administration will be able to end it completely. Now, as we're seeing here, is that Attorney General Paxton from Texas will try and push it to re-implement it. So this is very, very concerning. The amount of obstructionists that are coming from the Republican Party and trying to prevent any real progress in improving the immigration system. It still has many, many faults, and it is definitely a broken immigration system here in the U.S. However, we need to be able to take actionable steps to at least make it more humane. And this was definitely a humane piece, ending the public charge rule, which was just affecting undocumented immigrants or asylum seekers. It was affecting immigrants who were here legally, going through the legal process, which, again, these Republican representatives say is their main objective, is that everyone should come in a legal fashion in the right way. At the same time, they're fighting for a public charge rule which punishes those who are coming here in a legal manner and just need help, especially during a global pandemic, which, again, under the Trump administration was not handled properly. We have over 500,000 dead Americans. More than 500,000 have died from this virus, and people need help. This is why we had to pass a COVID relief bill twice, although the first one was more of a tax giveaway under the Republicans. And we will most likely need more relief going forward. It is still ongoing, and it is rather cruel and unusual to try and re-implement a rule which particularly affects people who need help from the government during a time of crisis. So we have no idea what's going to happen with this. Hopefully it goes nowhere. I don't believe it will, but considering during the Trump administration, they were very successful in implementing a plan to appoint many federal judges, we're still unsure what this could mean in the future. So it's something else to keep in mind. Again, a little bit of bad news, which is very unfortunate, just how opportunistic many of these representatives are, taking advantage of a lot of this human suffering at the U.S. border for their own political gain, really, especially when we have the 2022 elections coming up. In this article, it's really mentioned that many of these Republican representatives are even bragging when they do these lawsuits to really block all progress going forward. So it's unfortunate, but not surprising when you see the current trends of partisanship within the U.S. Now, we only have another roughly three stories to cover, but also rather concerning because it does involve the courts again. So just to show you here, is that this past Tuesday, a federal judge was supposed to rule on the legality of the DACA program, so for dreamers in this country. However, U.S. District Judge Andrew Hannon did not rule that day. Instead, he set an early April deadline for lawyers on both sides, both the Republican-led side and the, advocate-led side in defense of DACA, to provide more information. What this means, I'm not 100% clear, but what it does say is that the legal status of DACA continues to be in jeopardy, even under the Biden administration, because it's really hanging over from the Trump administration. Just to really, again, show you is that this is, again, from Texas. Texas heads a coalition of Republican-led states that want Judge Hannon to invalidate the DACA program, which was, again, instituted in 2012 by then President Barack Obama. Defending the program is the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Educational Fund and the state of New Jersey. So, again, it is rather hypocritical, contradictory, that in the beginning of the Trump administration, there's always these claims that Trump would protect DACA recipients. And even now, Republicans say that they do believe that dreamers deserve some kind of support because it's not their fault and they are American as much as any other American child. And yet at the same time, you have Republican-led states leading a lawsuit to really dismantle and destroy the DACA program, which would then put these recipients, DACA recipients, in a very unfortunate and very precarious legal position in the sense that they may be then up for deportation immediately. And with the fact that the federal government has their personal information, it would be no surprise if it would be rather swift. So we do have to keep this in mind and be careful with it. Again, this is back from March 30th, so it has been some days that passed, and we've not had too much of an update on this. Again, it's in early April, so we do have some days, maybe a week or two, before we have a final decision by the judge on whether or not DACA can remain as a program in the U.S. Hopefully, it's a favorable decision. We'll keep you posted as we go forward on the current state of DACA with this judge. Next is to talk about why we need immigration reform right now, relevant to the news, of course, is this story which caught my attention. It comes from Connecticut in terms of deportations. And it's very, very concerning. I think we should all be very concerned of the implications of this, of just how rogue many of these federal departments are when it comes to their decisions to really punish immigrants who are here. If you're aware with the priorities for federal immigration enforcement, is they tend to target people with a criminal record. Well, in Connecticut, there's a state board which provides pardons for different crimes, and they have been pardoning certain immigrants who would then be put up for deportation. However, the Department of Homeland Security has decided to completely ignore these pardons, which led to a lawsuit in October, I believe, of 2019. So getting closer, roughly a year and a half ago, right? What this meant is the end result of the court case was a settlement where the Department of Homeland Security said that they would respect and recognize the pardons from the Connecticut State Board. However, we've only learned roughly last week that they were caught continuing to deport these migrants who had received a state pardon. This means that really, again, it highlights the fact that many of these state departments involved in immigration are really rogue acting. They will act on whatever they think is best in their own interest. And that is very concerning when you see the implications of all the ICE raids, which occurred under the Trump administration and continue to occur in different places. It really means that regardless of what limitations are being placed on them, even from court orders, they are willing to go above and beyond to achieve their own personal goals. And that's what we're seeing here in Connecticut. And on March 23rd, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security had to issue a statement saying, and I'll kind of highlight it here for you, it would honor Connecticut pardons, but also said in that same statement that states' pardons still may not be valid. So it is very much a backhanded approach that the Department of Homeland Security is taking, is that they're on one hand saying that, yeah, sure, we'll recognize your pardons, you have state rights. However, we're not going to care. It will not be valid, or may not, is what they're saying. They don't want to admit fully that they're still going to continue these deportations, but that it may not be valid, and they may not actually use it for forgiving these migrants who are up for deportation. So again, very, very concerning. Not amazing news to have when it comes to this. But to not really depress everyone, I do have one piece of good news, because it does show us possible hope going forward when it comes to different states taking action to actually help migrants going through these different processes. And that is that on March 30th, there has been the possibility of seeing a push for ending policies that profit from the suffering of immigrants. And that is especially from private detention centers. This, again, is a very strange model of business that they run, where they are incentivized to hold more people, that they get more money from it. And this really is a perverse relationship where then, of course, enforcement will go up and send people with very minor offenses or just for living in this country to then have them detained there to benefit these centers. Now, however, in the state of Washington, very recently, I believe on March 30th, the Senate passed a bill that was already passed through the House, saying that there will be a ban on for-profit detention centers in the state of Washington. Now, there's only one facility currently operating in the Northwest, which has a 1,575 bed immigration jail. So there's only one place that this would apply to, but it will be a permanent ban going forward. It is really an amazing thing to see, because if you remember, the President Biden's administration also passed an executive order saying they would not use for private prisons. However, that was for regular use of it, for normal crimes of U.S. citizens. However, private detention centers, that's perfectly fine, and they're still using it. So it is meaningful, at least, that U.S. states are beginning to ban the use of private facilities for detention. It means that we are not going to be overly enforcing immigrant communities just to fill up these beds for the incentive of profit. Now, what this means really, and I do have some particular details on what the bill does, is that, let me just pull up some more information here to share, is that right now it has not been signed by the governor yet. We're not sure when he's going to do it, but it should be within the next few weeks or even days, because he has already publicly supported the bill. So it's not a concern of whether or not it will be vetoed. So that's great to know. The other detail you need to know is that this particular private detention center that's operated by this Geo group is still going to be operating. It's not that it's going to completely close it right away. It is a ban for future contracts to not exist in the States. So this particular private detention center will still be operating until 2025. That is the end of its contract with the state of Washington. Still, again, it's good news that they will not be able to really open up any more contracts with private detention centers going forward. Now, just to kind of give you those specific details of what this means is that the bill would prohibit any person, business, state, or local governmental entity from operating private detention facilities in Washington, as well as utilizing contracts with a private detention facility in the state. So it's trying to get rid of even some loopholes rather than leave them open where then they can kind of weasel their way into still using private detention centers. So again, great news. I think we should be very happy that the state of Washington is doing this and hope that other states will follow suit. I believe they're joining roughly 20 other states in some form of a ban on private detention, on private facilities being used for housing different inmates or detainees. Again, not all of these states have a ban on detention centers, just to be clear. But again, we hope that then these states will follow suit and other states throughout the country, and preferably the federal government as well, to make sure that we're very much not profiting off of the suffering of people and migrants who are even at more harm when it comes to this process overall. So this has really been the entire news for the past 2 weeks, just to really catch everyone up on what's happening and updates on certain stories that we covered 2 weeks ago. So we, as I had mentioned in the beginning, we're still in a very similar position that we were 2 weeks ago before we took our break, which again is unfortunate but not surprising. The border situation is really putting a halt to all forms of progress on any kind of immigration reform going forward. And I'm not 100% sure what that means for immigration reform, because we'll cover it right now, really, is that immigration reform is at a complete standstill across the entire board, which is very unfortunate. There's no plans for movement in the U.S. Senate. If you remember, a little over 2 weeks ago, we were very happy that the House passed 2 different immigration reform bills. Not so much happy with certain ones because of different provisions within it, such as the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which had E-Verify for the entire agricultural sector, which would be terrible. But nonetheless, it does provide some kind of a pathway to citizenship for agricultural workers. Those 2 bills have not moved, and I'll maybe go through each one very quickly. When it comes to the U.S. Citizenship Act, we have not seen any news on it at all, unfortunately. If you remember, it is still in the House Judiciary Committee. It has not received any date for review, to my awareness. I may be incorrect, and I'll look this up again. But I'm not aware of it making any movement so far. If anything, it might just get marked up in the committee, and then hopefully we'll see if it can maybe make it for a floor vote. But that is also very unlikely. If you remember, I've been covering very frequently the lack of support that this comprehensive bill has. It's very, very unfortunate, because I'll share here is that Senator Schumer has already publicly stated that he is willing to support comprehensive reform in the Senate as long as the House sends him a bill. So it is very unfortunate that we have a Senate leader who is willing to try and do something with comprehensive reform, but the House leader and House representatives have decided to just abandon President Biden's push for a comprehensive immigration reform, and also even more concerning that the president himself has abandoned his own comprehensive reform bill. So that's, again, the current state of the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021. Very unfortunate, because it is comprehensive, and I believe it is one of the only Democrat-sponsored bills that would give a pathway to citizenship for all undocumented immigrants. Many of these other bills are only for a very small, select group of immigrants that are deemed worthy enough to get citizenship, such as the DREAM Act, American Dream and Promise Act, and the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. Again, everyone deserves a pathway to citizenship. I'm not denying that. But it is always very concerning when our community is broken up into those who deserve help and those who do not. And I do want to maybe talk a little bit about the current state of immigration reform because, as I mentioned, the DREAM Act of 2021, if you remember, that was introduced in the Senate, it has made no movement whatsoever. It's just been introduced and has sat there. I believe 2 weeks ago we covered a story where Senator Dick Durbin said that he is close to having enough votes to do something with the DREAM Act of 2021, currently in the Senate. We've not heard an update on it. I'm not aware. But just to let you know, the Senate has been on recess for maybe a week now, and they'll be back on April 10th. So it's still to be seen what happens with many of these bills. When it comes to the American Dream and Promise Act, again, which was passed 2 weeks ago, roughly, again, nothing. The Senate has not put it for a committee review. It has not really moved it whatsoever. And that same limbo applies to the Farm Workforce Modernization Act of 2021, which was passed the same day as the H.R. 6. So these two bills, unfortunately, they were passed in the House with some enthusiasm, but they've not made any progress whatsoever in the Senate. We're going to see what happens coming up when they're off of recess, but I do want to talk a little bit about that, right? Is that the Senate comes back from their recess, meaning their vacation, their break, when there's so many issues that they should be focusing on, but they're coming back on April 10th with new priorities. And these priorities were specified by the Senate leader, Chuck Schumer, in a letter to his representatives. And the strange part, as was reported here by ABC News, is that in this spring agenda for especially the Senate Judiciary Committee, which would be reviewing the DREAM Act, immigration legislation was not included. Yeah, so it was absent from the spring agenda. So again, very, very weird, I would say, and unfortunate that the Senate will not be reviewing immigration legislation right away. I'm surprised by that. I figured that considering Senator Dick Durbin was very insistent that he was close to getting the support for the DREAM Act, that it would have they would have at least placed this up for review. Or again, we have three bills in the Senate that need to go for a review. The DREAM Act of 2021, a standalone bill for only Dreamers. The American Dream and Promise Act of 2021, which again includes Dreamers and TPS holders, which was passed by the House, now sitting in the Senate, and the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which is again for agricultural workers, also sitting in the Senate. So 3 immigration reform bills just sitting in the Senate with no movement whatsoever and not even placed on the spring agenda. He had an interview, Senator Chuck Schumer, asking him about these priorities that he expressed in a letter and then in this press conference in particular. And when asked about why there was no real mention about immigration reform, his response was, well, look, the bottom line is that I believe in comprehensive immigration reform. I'm a full supporter of the bill Menendez had. This House has sent us other bills, and we're going to meet and figure out the best way forward where we can get the most done. So he is saying, again, repeating that he believes in comprehensive immigration reform. He wishes he could have a bill, and that he's received these other 3 bills that are for consideration, but that they still need to meet and talk about what they think is the best way to go forward. So still very unprepared, I would say, Democratic representatives in both the House and Senate to push this. And it's very, very unfortunate, considering really recent news, which surprised even myself, is that Senator Joe Manchin, and he's no stranger to this particular show. Everything's kind of going crazy on my end, so very sorry. Now there's a green screen. But now you know the secret to my library. But just to continue, is this surprise notice, and things are bugging out a little bit. So I think I'm going to just not share an article on that and really just explain it from the top of my head, is that Senator Joe Manchin, he is really a vote that is difficult to come forward with, is because he is a more conservative, moderate Democrat in the U.S. Senate. And the unfortunate part is that he was not really expressing too much of an alignment on supporting immigration reform. However, really recently, I believe on April 1st, he came out publicly on a Facebook Live video, I believe, and then in a more formal statement saying that he supports a pathway to citizenship for all undocumented immigrants in the U.S. So again, very surprising coming from a moderate Democrat. Of course, he did context it saying that because this was right off of a visit to the U.S. border, that he does support enhanced border enforcement to try and get the border under control. Again, a very conservative talking point to defeat immigration reform. Yet he did, again, surprise us, saying that he supports it, and not only supports it, he does believe that we need comprehensive immigration reform to help all undocumented immigrants, along with dreamers, and even the agricultural workers who would be helped under the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. So this is, again, surprising, but very welcome, I would say. I imagine that we're going to really have to keep an eye on this, see where it goes. Again, it's unfortunate, but immigration reform probably will not be addressed in the Senate for the coming weeks. According to Schumer, he did mention that it's going to take weeks to months to handle all of these bills. So the unfortunate truth, and always to be honest, is that we will most likely not see much movement of immigration reform in the Senate until the border crisis is a little bit more under control, to give Democrats the confidence and the reassurance that they will not be taking any political risks to push forward immigration reform bills. Again, this is one of my biggest critiques of the Democratic Party so far when it comes to pushing for immigration reform, is that they are taking a topic which is highly supported by the American people. If you remember, I continually share different polls and surveys that were collected, where it shows that the vast majority of people, especially for dreamers, support pathways to citizenship for undocumented immigrants in this country. So again, we have to be very careful. Like it does help that the push for immigration reform is growing within the Democratic Party, but we do have to hold people accountable for the fact that they ran, President Joe Biden ran on this platform of making reforms for a more humane and just immigration system, and yet they are not really helping to push this forward as a collective party. So again, this does remain to be seen where we're going to go. Again, it's unfortunate that progress has not been made. We are going to see what happens when they come back from the recess on April 10th. It's on us as well to be calling on a daily basis to force and pressure our representatives to make sure they support comprehensive immigration reform. The U.S. Citizenship Act should not be just sitting in committee just to be marked up and hopefully brought to a floor vote. It should be. And we have to make sure that we are applying the necessary pressure to support this bill on our end, and to have representatives who have a position of power to also support this bill and have their colleagues and pressure their colleagues to support it in the future. But for now, that's really been an update on all the news that's happened in these past 2 weeks, and as well as an update on reform these past 2 weeks. Had some technical glitches, which is unfortunate, but you can also see the white void once again if you'd like. There you go. So there's the secret behind that, just to share. But with that in mind, again, I'll just highlight the need for calling your representatives. It is crucial and important that we start calling as soon as possible. Again, we do have a little bit of time, not so much time really, that on April 10th is when they start coming back. But we've already been told, as I mentioned earlier, that immigration reform, unfortunately, is not going to be one of their priorities. They are going to focus on 3 other, I believe it involves civil rights, voting rights. So it's to be seen what happens. But again, please call your representatives or email them if you prefer that. This number, as I keep on sharing each of our shows, is the congressional switchboard. All you need to know is your representative's name, whether they're a U.S. representative from the House of Representatives or a U.S. senator from the U.S. Senate. If you have their name, call this number. It takes less than 3 minutes. They will just ask you who you want to be connected to and just provide their name, and they'll connect you directly to their office. It is important that we call, again, less than 3 minutes just to say, I am a citizen of the or not so much a citizen. You don't even have to be a citizen, so excuse that. But I'm a resident of such state. I'm a constituent of this representative, and I support the U.S. Citizenship Act, and they should too. They should be pressuring their colleagues to also support it. And again, I would prefer we fight for the U.S. Citizenship Act, but if you prefer fighting for the DREAM Act, if you want the American Dream and Promise Act, or even if you want the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, now is the time. Just call or email. These are recorded. The topic, they are not going to ask for your legal status. You do not have to be scared of that. And you can call as many times as you want. If you want to call 20 times a day, feel free to. I don't think that they can actually block you for that. Or if you just want to call once a day. But every day, consistently, we need to call them and let them know that this is important to us. We need this now, and we need it to help millions. And I cannot stress that enough. This is for millions of people living in this country who are in fear of retribution just for trying to live their life. And actually, I wish that the screen there didn't bug out, because surprisingly, Senator Manchin had a rather inspirational way of putting this, his argument for why we should have immigration reform. And I'll just read it to you instead. So forgive me if I'm looking off on the side. It's just I need to look at my other screen here. But it is beyond time, past time, to do immigration reform. Immigration reform should be a pathway to citizenship. People that have been here, they might have come here the wrong way, but they came here for the right reason. And, I don't agree with a lot of his politics. I can definitely disagree with many of his stances on different issues, and his stance when it comes to why we need bipartisanship, which I don't believe in it existing now. But when it comes to this statement that he made in support of immigration reform, I'm completely behind it. Yes, people have come here in different ways, whether it's counted as authorized or not, but they came here for a particular reason, and it was to support to support their families back at home, and to really find opportunity for a better life. And that is really a core value in the U.S. It is part of the founding of this country, despite many of the dark and horrible sides of the American story, right, involving genocide and racism. But at its core is people looking for opportunity, trying to make a change in their life. And this, again, is really the reason why we need immigration reform. It needs to be humane, it needs to be just, and it needs to help these millions of people who are in this country already contributing and just want an opportunity to live a peaceful life. And I think that's the best way I can really leave this off. And this is the reason why we need to be calling every day right now. So please call if you need help. Find a good way to call, or even to know your representative's name. Please visit our campaign's website at citizenship2021.org/action. It's scrolling across the bottom of the screen. And as we kind of go into the cut to end the program, I'm going to leave it scrolling on the bottom there just for your convenience. But please check it out. It gives you step-by-step instructions of how to find out your representative's name, to find their personal number, their office number rather. They're a way to email them. But it also provides you a script if you're not comfortable and you don't know exactly how to ask for their support on this kind of a bill. It gives you a script, at least for the U.S. Citizenship Act, but you can always switch the different pieces and make it your own statement. And again, please call this number and just tell them the representative's name, and you'll be able to contact them right away. But for now, I think that's the best way I can really leave it off. I'll leave it again, the scrolling piece there, just for you to see how to call your representative. I turned off the wrong one, but that's perfectly fine. And for now, that's going to be the end of today's show. Next week, we'll be back as usual, same time. And we're going to really cover, again, the usual immigration news, a little bit more on the reforms to see what's possible. And then again, we'll talk more about how we can take action now. That is very important. So as always, thank you so much for being a part of this. It means a lot to have you watching. And I'll see you next week, or even tomorrow if you want to see the Spanish segment. Same time, 1:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, or 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But thank you for being here with me. And yeah, let's just keep on changing people's lives for the better and fighting for a just and humane immigration system. For now, bye-bye.